tape?
A powerful man has been murdered.
Holy.
A hidden camera recorded the crime.
None of this goes beyond us. We don't need any more problems, do we?
An innocent bystander
Are those my Christmas presents?
In your dreams, buddy.
Dad.
was given the evidence.
We have reason to believe that Mr. Fellhauer may have passed sensitive materials to you.
No, he didn't pass me anything.
How did you happen to be at Ruby's today?
I was shopping for
Sold Detroit merchandise.
That's still legal, isn't it?
Sean Windsor.
No, I was picking something up for myself. I do a little cross-dressing on the weekends.
Let's get into his life. You asked it around, get your finger out of my face. It's gone.
What are you doing?
That is not paid for by them. That is paid for by the people of Detroit.
You might be qualified, ML.
I'm not qualified for this job.
Let me tell you something. You want to go right now? Okay? You want to go right now?
Hey kids, it's your old pal ML Elric doing a little cross-dressing. As you can see, today I dressed up like a man. A grown-up man with a necktie and a shirt with a collar. This is what we used to wear before.
Don't say it. Whatever it is you're going to say.
What? If there really was a pandemic.
Don't say it.
It could be a conspiracy, but we're going to find out because on today's show, we are joined by Andy Kroll, who knows a little something about conspiracies. He's written a book called Why Do the Refs Always Job the Wolverines? And the Murder of Seth Rich and the Age of Conspiracy. So he's diving into all the big conspiracies, and we're gonna talk to Andy in just a minute. But first, we want to thank the sponsors who make this show possible, despite all the reasons they shouldn't. Hall Financial and Luke Nowacki. If you need a good deal on a house, a purchase, a refinance, Hall Financial is the one to go to. And if you're watching the stock market right now, don't do it. Let Luke do it. He is much stronger than you. He's better looking than you. He's smarter than you. And he will tell you, just chill the hell out because it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay someday. And Mark Fellhauer's here as well. And Sean, his helicopter just landed out back. He ran in and he's ready to go. Yep, there he is. Okay, that's Sean.
Wow, great contribution there, Sean.
Wow, it's...
Silence sometimes is the best contribution.
I think Denny McClain teed up Mickey Mantle, and it went better than that. He had to throw him a second pitch, but at least he hit it. Sean's here and ready to go.
What an obscure and correct reference. I like that. Yeah.
So
thanks for comparing me to, or comparing yourself to Denny McClain. That's nice.
Well, Denny...
Boy, you are a grumpy mood today. All right.
By the way, let Luke handle your retirement accounts. Not Denny. Denny's not the one.
No.
So, but hope you're not listening, Denny.
Once again, another correct reference.
Andy is a proud graduate. In fact, an insufferably proud graduate of the University of Michigan, which I think he meant was supposed to distinguish him, but every graduate from the University of Michigan I've met is insufferable. So let's tell you about the other stuff he's done that sets him apart. He is with ProPublica, an investigative reporting nonprofit that does some fantastic work. And he's the author of A Death on W Street. There really is a book. It is The Death on W Street, The Murder of Seth Rich and the Age of Conspiracy. And he joins us today. At least we think it's him. Is it really you, Andy? Can we trust you?
It is me in a illustrious hotel conference room here, beaming to you live. Still insufferable, still proud of my Wolverine fandom.
Is that normal for you to take up a whole conference room instead of just do this from your regular room?
He's a Wolverine.
Is that a Michigan thing?
No, he's being professional. Probably has better internet.
They needed that much room for his head.
Oh, I see how the Michigan guy here,
Indigo.
the Michigan guy here is going to defend that. Yeah.
Uh-oh, is that the government? Wait a minute. Is this being recorded?
Someone's beeping through Zoom.
I don't think it's me. Uh-oh, okay.
No, it's through Zoom.
Oh.
So it's either Andy or it's Joe.
Dr. Joseph Zuver will be troubleshooting this
That's really
immediately. Weird. But Andy is here, and he maybe, okay, I thought he was going to explode.
No, it's still going, so.
Where's MacGruber when you need him?
We need to fix it. Yeah. Boy. Okay.
Did we lose Andy?
Andy, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you hear that beeping?
I can hear it a little bit. Yeah, faintly though.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Joe, are we signed in or something?
I feel like we're broadcasting from the embassy in Cuba.
I don't know. Something on that computer is what's beeping.
Nice.
Let me try muting myself and see if that makes
This is exciting to do it. Yeah, do it this way.
Okay, so we've stopped the beeping, but now our guest is muted, so that may have solved one problem and created another one.
It somehow just stopped. Okay,
there we go.
So everything's fine. Everything's great. We'll fix it in post.
Oh, shit.
Except for the live stream.
Opus Dei is everywhere, man.
We were on a submarine there, right? A little sonar.
It could be, yeah. That's where's Sean Connery when we need him?
Exactly.
With his Scottish-Russian accent.
Or the Aussie who was in that with his Russian accent.
Sam Neill.
Sam Neill.
I think he's from New Zealand.
Is he New Zealander? Okay.
It's like Fort Worth is suburb of Dallas. Yeah.
Okay.
Same thing. Andy, thanks for joining us. I know you're out of time, but please buy his book. It's called A Death on W Street, The Murder of Seth Rich and Age of Conspiracy. It's available at underground bookshops everywhere or on the Trilateral Commission's website.
Any more? You want to keep going? Why are you looking at me?
You're going to team up.
I'm waiting for somebody to work in a George Soros reference, but I guess we'll just get right to Andy. So, Andy, you wrote this book in part because your job is to get through the bullshit, but also because you had some familiarity with Seth Rich and an affinity for who he is because he could have been you, as you write in your book. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's kind of scary. This guy just gets snatched off the street, gets killed, and then from there, well, you know what happened from there.
This story started in a weird place for me, and I'm sure you can relate to this. Usually as a journalist, I get a tip from a source, or I read something in the news, or some, eye-glazingly boring government report, a detail that catches my eye. Something in the course of doing my actual day job makes me think, oh, this is a story. This is something I should pursue. But in this case, it was the complete opposite, a total 180, which is, I ran in the same social circles, had a lot of friends in common with Seth Rich, one of the subjects of this book. And when I learned that he was killed, it was not from a source or a tip or anything like that. It was from a friend texting me, it's telling me that this guy that we both knew, we played on this like horrible beer league soccer team with Seth, that he'd been shot and killed in D.C. walking home from a bar, probably too late at night in D.C. My first thought was, this is tragic, that sort of weird, chilling, freaky feeling when someone that you kind of knew or someone that you could relate to is shot and killed, murdered in the nation's capital. And there was a feeling of, there but for the grace of God go I. I have walked home too late from a bar in Washington, D.C. I have talked on the phone walking home from said bar too late at night in Washington, D.C. So to see what happened to him shot and killed about a block from where he lived was, a really personal experience. It was something that registered not on my journalistic wavelengths. My reporter's brain did not turn on in that moment. My sort of guy in DC, 20-something guy in DC brain turned on. And it really wasn't until a week or two later, after the news story, the local news story about Seth Rich's murder playing out and then sort of fading away, that the journalist's brain flipped on. And that is when I started to see this stuff online involving Seth, involving the election, involving where he worked in politics, take on this entirely new everything, just take on a life of its own in a way that none of us had expected.
And the conspiracy theory is that he worked for the DNC and he's the one that leaked all the data, and not the Russians, right? I mean, is that the easiest way to put it? And therefore, because he's the leaker, that the DNC, mainly the Clintons, took him out. Is that the basis of the conspiracy?
That is the fundamental core of the conspiracy theory. Now, there would be all kinds of different variations, different flavors. I mean, this conspiracy theory shot off in 50 different directions, as so many of these conspiracy theories often do. They take on different dimensions depending on who's telling it, who's sharing it. But the fundamental core of this is just what you described. And so you got to take your mind back to the insanity of 2016, which I'm not sure anyone really wants to do, but bear with me. Presidential race is in full force at this point in time. July 10th, 2016 is when Seth was shot and killed. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders have been duking it out all winter, spring, into summer. Bitter battle, really pulling the Democratic Party apart. And in the end, Hillary Clinton sort of ekes it out, perhaps with a little bit of help from the Democratic establishment.
Sure.
In the end, Donald Trump has similarly dispatched with the entire Republican field, senators, governors. Jeb Bush gets his own category, and claimed the Republican nomination. So there's this chaotic, what the heck is going on, like real WTF moment for, I think, a lot of Americans. And in the midst of all of this, there are these leaked emails from the Democratic National Committee, the sort of central hub of the Democratic Party, that are published online by WikiLeaks. And these emails are mostly kind of petty office politics, backbiting, complaints, et cetera, et cetera. But there is some stuff in there where it looks like the heads of the DNC weren't particularly fond of Senator Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear almost from the get-go that this was an attempt to interfere in the American election, the presidential election, by a foreign country, foreign adversary, in this case, Russia. And that didn't look good for Donald Trump. It didn't look good for the Republican Party. And so this theory starts to appear literally within hours of Seth Rich's murder being announced publicly. This theory starts to surface that somehow Seth was the leaker or the whistleblower, that he was this disgruntled insider who helped get these emails out into the world and then was knocked off by the Clintons or evil Democratic elites. There's a couple of versions of the theory that it was like the FBI or the CIA agents, you know, who pulled this off. But yes, it really comes down to trying to take the attention off of this really extraordinary event, again, a foreign country getting involved and trying to mess with our elections, and say, no, actually, it was this guy who was just killed in D.C. That seems kind of suspicious. Something's fishy there. So we're going to point the finger at him instead.
So young guy killed at night, leaving a bar in a major city. Not an extraordinary happening, unfortunately. But where he worked, that adds an element that's like, okay, that may be fodder for somebody. But the speed with which this completely cockamamie scheme comes out, that he may be the key player and all this other stuff, was that somebody just grabbing a few pieces and putting them together and then pushing it out there and saying this is what happened? Or was this part of something that was orchestrated from the beginning to say, this is somebody else, but we can pin it on these guys. Here's how we're going to do it. Everybody get in the bunker. Here's the blueprint. Everybody in your places. Let's go. Activate the plan now.
All the reporting I did about the very beginning, the origins of these conspiracy theories about Seth Rich, points very strongly to the first scenario, which is people grasping for possible explanations, people reaching for some kind of connecting of the dots when some of these dots didn't even exist, or the distance traveled between these dots was so absurd as to defy all fact and logic. But people connected them anyway. What's interesting about that really early moment where these conspiracy theories about Seth Rich are popping up is that while they would later really flourish, take off, find a huge audience, and even see some of that sort of strategizing in the bunker, as you just put it, that would be on the right-hand side of the political spectrum. The earliest stuff started on the way, way, way far left. Really hardcore Bernie Sanders supporters of Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. There's a piece of trivia, 2016 trivia for all the folks out there. And it was there where people were saying, oh, he was a disgruntled insider who wanted to expose the DNC, his own employer, for nefarious things that they were doing. And so that's why he gave the emails to, WikiLeaks or whoever that put them out into the world. And so this thing started on the far left and would eventually move to the right. It covers the whole spectrum, which I always found really fascinating because I think it's a useful reminder that like one side doesn't have a monopoly on conspiratorial thinking.
Crazy.
Like,
yeah.
All kinds of people do this. Yeah. The crazy is equally distributed. One of the few things equally distributed in America. So it started there, but it wouldn't really sort of blast off until it got picked up on the right-hand side, where supporters of then candidate Donald Trump, soon to be President Donald Trump, again, we're in 2016 here, saw this conspiracy theory as the most useful piece of information because they could point to it and say, look, the Russians aren't helping our guy. This whole Russia thing is fake. It was this dead guy, Seth Rich. He's the one who did it. And so, let's stop talking about election interference and Russia and all that sort of stuff. So it was convenient for both sides. And I think that's why it got picked up so quickly. That, and people had been talking about the Clintons as mass murderers, serial killers, the Clinton body count list for decades at that point. So there was also a priming element to this as well. People were primed to believe that the Clintons would do this.
Seth's murder is...
Well, they killed Vince Foster, right?
Well,
so
there's
a track record.
23 people, that are associated with them on the list. But Seth's murder and the timing and how it happened and where it happened and where he worked was almost too ripe for conspiracy theories. But who was it that really shot it in the mainstream? Because there were a lot of opportunists, and I know you talked to Jack Bergman for the book and Roger Stone. Are those the first two guys that blew it up, or was it Julian Assange and WikiLeaks?
It was Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, I think, without a doubt. Because by the time mid-August 2016 rolls around, where the 2016 presidential race has solidified to just being Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and this thing is in full gear at that point, the folks on the far left had kind of stopped talking about Seth Rich. You could still find some stray tweets. You could find a couple of Reddit threads where people were still weighing in every once in a while, but it was not really a big thing anymore on the left. It had died down a bit. And then what happens is Julian Assange goes on television and he gives this interview, and it's a masterclass in sort of artful, and I don't mean this as a compliment, clearly, artful insinuation and deception. Assange is being asked over and over again, you've published these internal emails from the Democratic Party, and just as they would go on to publish John Podesta's emails in a few months.
Yep.
Where did you get these emails from? What's your source? How do we know that this isn't a foreign country interfering in U.S. politics, as a bunch of experts have already said it was? And Assange says, well, there was that 27-year-old who was just killed in D.C. a month ago. Our sources get really concerned when they see things like that. Our sources take risks. They know about these risks. And, Seth Rich's murder is something that's really alarming to them. And he doesn't come out and say, Seth Rich was my source. But he doesn't also say he wasn't. He dangles Seth's name ever so gently, ever so cleverly, that sent a signal to the online masses and to the real world masses as well. Oh, it was that Seth Rich guy. No, Russia had nothing to do with it. I mean, I went back and sort of recreated the timeline for all of this, and Assange, he is the first super spreader, if you will, forgive me, the metaphor, for the Seth Rich conspiracy theories. No. They go off the charts after he says what he says.
Now, with some conspiracy theories like Pizzagate, and, a guy shows up to Comet Ping Pong in D.C. with a gun, and there's real world consequences, not just people messing around.
He's trying to rescue the sex slaves in the basement, right? They were put there by Hillary Clinton.
So
since debunked, okay.
This conspiracy, like when Vince Foster happened, a lot of people talked about it and just, kind of laughed about it. But with Seth's, did it have real world consequences for his family? I mean, were they threatened? Did they have weird encounters with strangers on the street?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they have had so many strange, frightening, sometimes just plain bizarre encounters online, in real life. You know, they were inundated with messages and Facebook DMs, emails, phone calls, all this kind of stuff that you can imagine as a result of these conspiracy theories, especially when they really take off after Assange, and then later after Fox News gets really active on this story as well. But, you know, they installed security cameras all over their house. They had to lock down basically a lot of their social media. They got really sort of paranoid, rightfully. I mean, people came to their house. Yeah. People posted their public information online, how to reach them. You know, it absolutely changed their personalities and how they see the world. And that's Seth's parents, Joel and Mary. His brother, Aaron, got it even worse. His brother, Aaron, as I write in the book, spent a lot of time trying to push back on these insane claims about Seth and the election. And
that's just going to make it
job
worse.
With the DNC.
Yeah.
He for trying to push back and clear his brother's name, as any of us would do if we saw this happening to our brother or our sister, or our parent, whatever. Aaron himself got wrapped into this. It's like the conspiracy theorists saw him trying to fix things and said, oh, actually, you know, I think you're part of this too. And then said that, you know, the whole, conspiracy theory about stealing these emails and leaking them was a joint operation by the two brothers, for which there was absolutely no evidence. They said that Aaron had gotten paid for these emails. And at one point, one of the conspiracy theorists I write about in the book said that Aaron knew his brother was going to be killed beforehand.
Oh, God.
And did nothing to stop it. Like, he knew the hit was coming and did nothing to stop it. So, yeah, I mean, these people have had their lives turned upside down, just like the guy who owns Comet Ping Pong, which is the subject of the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, the Sandy Hook families. You know, to be on the receiving end of this stuff is unlike anything 99.9% of people have ever lived through.
Well, I've lived through it not as the sibling, but as a reporter. When we look at the Kwame Kilpatrick Manoogian Mansion party rumor, which never happened. The party didn't happen. Other parties happened, and I'm sure there were women there who were not his wife at one time or another, but that's a different matter. One of the things that we found so frustrating about this, and I'm sure that Aaron went through that, and I'm sure you went through that as well, is whenever you pin something down or eliminate it, it changes. You know, when we first started looking at the Manoogian Mansion party rumor, there was no dead stripper. The mayor's wife pistol whipped somebody. Then it turned into a table leg. Then it turned into there was a stripper. And then what happens is crazy real life things that are true get folded into it. Like there was a former stripper who worked for the chief of police. So, well, then she must have been the stripper at the party. And that's why we can't find the other woman's hospital records, because they used the stripper police chief employee's healthcare card. So maybe she wasn't the stripper, but they just used her identity to make sure she could get treated at the hospital. And then you eliminate that, and then you get this. And then at some point you become part of the conspiracy. You're now covering it up. And it's one of those things where, and I don't know if Aaron feels this way, but when you start trying to stop all these little cracks, you're now in the middle of this like the don't break the ice game where it's all going to collapse underneath you, and you wish you could go back in time and just say, I'm going to ignore all of it, because there's no point in trying to hold people to empirical facts, because they just don't matter. If people want to believe it,
how do you prove a lie? How do you prove a lie isn't true, right? I mean, I don't know
this was the issue that that Aaron confronted. It was the issue that James Alefantis, the guy who runs Comet Ping Pong, again, the subject of this like horrible and completely fake Pizzagate conspiracy theory confronted as well, which is like, what are you supposed to do when someone says something insane and unimaginably ridiculous about you? Are you supposed to write an op-ed that says, no, I don't run a child trafficking operation out of the basement of my pizzeria, which, by the way, doesn't have a basement?
Yeah.
Like, well, one, you're not convincing anyone who needs convincing because they're reading that and they're just saying, of course he would say that. Yeah. And two, the people who believe you are going to say, well, yeah, of course. Like, it seems kind of weird that you would write this op-ed. So you're in this horrible position. And I mean, I think about it similarly with Aaron and then later with me and how I, wrote the book, which with Aaron, I mean, he got to a point where there was nothing he felt like he could do in the court of public opinion that was going to make things one iota better. He tried everything at his disposal to convince people who were saying all these crazy things about him that they were not true and to stop saying them. And every time he did that, they instead twisted those words and said, of course he would say this. Mm-hmm. He's denying it, which means we're on the right track. And by the way, chip in $5 a month to my Patreon to keep me investigating this story. I mean, this literally happens.
Well, that's the sickening thing. Like when you think of Alex Jones and people like that, it's simply about making money for themselves, and it seems like they really don't care who gets in their way. I'd love to see somebody do this, not for money, right? And just kind of throw it out there. Going back to the murder of Seth Rich, it's still unsolved. They know it's a homicide by shooting. A wallet wasn't taken. Watch wasn't taken. So what was the purpose for it? Do you know what that is? And secondly, I've got to believe this was one of the more heavily investigated homicides in Washington. What can you tell us about the investigation?
Yeah. I could tell you a lot on both fronts. So, he lived in a neighborhood in D.C. called Bloomingdale, which is kind of on the front edge of the gentrification wave in D.C. It's a nice pocket of the city, but also it's near a huge corridor that runs north-south in D.C. That I think, from talking to the police, from talking to federal prosecutors who work cases in D.C. because there's no DA's office in D.C., they say that being so close to this big North Capitol Street corridor does make you a little more prone to carjackings, muggings, armed robberies than you might be secluded elsewhere in Northwest D.C. Seth's neighborhood is kind of a tight, mazy place. And in the summer of 2016 had basically been turned into a open air labyrinth. They were building this tunnel underneath the neighborhood because the neighborhood flooded all the time. Residents complained. And so they had essentially ripped up half the neighborhood and they said, okay, we're going to build this dang tunnel to fix Bloomingdale. But there were fences and tarps and burnt out lights everywhere. And I went back and I talked to residents at the time and they said, we felt unsafe walking home in Bloomingdale in broad daylight. We would never have been out walking at 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning because it felt like you were just a sitting duck. There were almost a dozen armed robberies in Seth's neighborhood in the months leading up to and a little bit after when he was killed. And the police have said, and I've talked to not just obviously the folks in office now, but retired homicide detectives, retired prosecutors, people who've worked in police, vice squad types, you name it. And they said that, everything about this crime looks to us like an armed robbery where Seth resisted or something went wrong. He was shot and the assailants fled. Based on the crime scene, based on what they believe the weapon was used, all this sort of forensics from the crime scene that sources relate to me, they're like, this is not what a hit looks like. But again, there are these details. Nothing was taken from him, his wallet, his cell phone, for instance. There are these details that also make you think, did something else happen? Like, why wouldn't they have grabbed his wallet on the way out? Now, the police I talked to said, the moment the gun goes off, you're not sticking around picking someone's pockets for their wallet or their loose change. You get the heck out of there. But you could see how someone who hadn't worked 50 homicides in their life would think, wow, this seems kind of suspicious. Or seems like, something else is going on here.
Well, was there a struggle, or was he just shot, like in a movie, they come up behind and shoot you in the back of the head?
There's evidence that there was a struggle as well, because there was some bruising consistent with not just a fall hitting the ground, but possibly, a fight with someone or fighting someone off. And then his wristband was torn on his hand, though the watch was still there, the wristband on his watch, which the police have also said, is likely evidence of a struggle between what was probably two guys who tried to rob him. And again,
well, that's probably why he was shot. Yeah. Then it was just a struggle. They shot him and then just got out of there, as opposed to just holding him up. He didn't want to give him the wallet. That's why he fights with them. I mean, that's kind of where the conspiracy falls apart for me, is that, first off, any conspiracy has a patsy, right? Wouldn't they have just found someone and said, hey, here's the person that murdered him? And I don't know. It just gets way weird and beyond that. Are you surprised many people buy into a conspiracy like this that aren't making money into it?
I shouldn't be surprised by the capacity of more people than I would like to think buying into something that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I guess one thing, though, that I've learned from writing this book is how fast people will jump to something that feels right, even if it sort of defies all logic, publicly known information, the basics about homicide investigations.
Andy, that's not just conspiracy theories. That's just America in general. We want answers. I mean, seriously, we want answers right away.
It's like, I interviewed all these people who knew Seth Rich and people who worked with him. And, what they said to me was, not to besmirch Seth's memory, but Seth was not a master hacker. He was not an IT specialist. He was more likely to get locked out of his own iPhone than he was to engineer some kind of brazen cyber operation, which is what these people are saying he did, which is central, as we said earlier, to the Seth Rich conspiracy theories, that he basically, carried out the most the most damning political heist since Watergate while working at the DNC without anyone noticing. It just doesn't make any sense. But I guess that's what I'm saying a second ago, is it's still kind of amazing to me how quickly people will discard any sort of contradicting evidence because something just feels right, or it hits that right note. Or, of course, the Clintons killed all those other people, Vince Foster, Ron Brown, the list goes on and on. Why wouldn't they kill someone else?
That's
the part that still gets me.
Feelings always beat facts.
Well, and there's also the issue of reception. If you're broadcasting something people don't want to hear, like this podcast, what people, they're just not going to listen, and there has to be that fertile ground. But one of the things that, and in this case, there were also a lot at stake here. With the Manoogian Mansion party rumor, I don't know what anybody had to gain from starting that, other than that they didn't like Kwame Kilpatrick, or maybe it was an offhand remark that somehow became like that snowball or that snowflake that turns into a massive snowball by the time it hits the village. In this case, people had a lot to gain. They had political cover. There were people who were making money off it. There were people who were getting ratings out of it. But this age of conspiracy, while it does seem like this is, it's crazier than it ever has been. I mean, I mentioned Kennedy. You have people who have been believing for 40 or 50 years that there was a conspiracy there. You have people who thought about Vince Foster. That was, 30 years ago. Are things really worse now?
I don't think they're worse in terms of the human mind's ability to spin these fantastical stories, or to see in the chaos a conspiracy, a sinister plot, to connect the dots when sometimes the dots don't even exist. That, I think, has been around for as long as human beings have had brains. When we were sitting in the cave, some people would look at the lights dancing on the wall and say, oh, that's kind of weird. I wonder what that is. We should go figure it out. And some people said, that is some kind of sinister thing coming to kill us all. I mean, we've been doing this for as long as we've been sentient. what I think is different today, and I actually think 2016, it was the absolute high watermark or low watermark possibly for this, is it's never been easier to find this information. It's never been easier to spread it and to spread it widely. And it's never been easier to make money off of it. The tools available to a conspiracy theorist are beyond the wildest imaginations of anyone who came before the last 10 years. I mean, it used to be that if you had a theory, you had to print it in a book or make a newspaper or have a ham radio. Usually you sit around a bar with like your buddies and say, I don't know about that moon landing. It seems kind of fake and like the earth looks a little weird in it. Maybe it never happened. And, your 4 or 5 buddies would say, interesting point. I should think more about that.
Yeah, and we'll get this guy a ride home. He shouldn't drive.
Right, exactly. I'm not riding home with you, but I am going to think about that some more.
Yeah.
But nowadays, like if you hit the Facebook algorithm right in that sweet spot, you can reach 10,000, 100,000, 1 million people in a day, maybe even if you do really well in an hour. And that power just did not exist up until, again, like the last 5 or 10 years, really. That's what I think is different. And we've always thought this way. We've always come up with this stuff. But the ability to get it to the masses has never been more powerful than it is right now.
So let's come back to that for just a minute. Are people taking advantage of these mechanisms that are out there for financial gain, to gain political favor or advantage? I mean, do you have a sense of what it is that, first of all, has so many people working so hard at this, and why we seem to be eating it up with a spoon? Like the big silly spoon that's as tall as, a human being. Like a shovel. It's really a shovel. Let's just call it a shovel. It's a very large shovel.
What spoon?
It's not a spoon at all. I eat a lot of cereal.
Have you just rebranded the shovel as a human-sized spoon? Because that is,
there you go.
That is a stroke of genius.
Yeah, it's a shovel for Fat Leonard, who we'll be talking about in our next segment. But it's a spoon for Fat Leonard. Yeah.
Well, so what drew me to writing the book was not just the truly unbelievable story of Seth Rich, his life and death, and all the insanity that came afterward. Insanity that I think kind of captures the larger insanity of American politics right now. But I also realized that the characters that I had at my disposal who represented the conspiracy theorists, all kind of each one of them kind of captured a different archetype that I think together adds up to like what we might call like the conspiracy theory industrial complex of the 21st century. So you have a guy like Jack Berkman, this Coen Brothers-esque DC lobbyist who, isn't that great at being a lobbyist and really just cares about getting his name out in the world. He wants to see his name in lights. Fame is what drives him more than anything. He gloms onto the Seth Rich conspiracy theories. And through him, I could kind of tell the story of like this new, though it's not entirely new, but this sort of online era type who like just looks for things in the news to latch onto and try to put their name out in the world, to try to get famous, the fame chaser. So there was one. There's another guy in here, Matt Couch, who I write about, who, really grabbed onto the Seth Rich story and used it to try to build up his own little media empire. He got to the point where he's selling T-shirts and he's raising money for the quote unquote campaigns. He has a little team of investigators. He's making money off of this. So there you have the kind of the money type. And then there's the whole world of the Roger Stones and the Jerome Corseys, the Sean Hannitys, who clearly grab onto this because they see it as politically advantageous. This will help our guy Trump. if we can promote this Seth Rich conspiracy theory, or if we can will it into reality, which Fox tried to do, but ultimately did not succeed at because, again, it's not true. This will help Trump. It will dismantle the quote unquote Russia hoax, and the president will have this cloud lifted off him. I could see all of these different types of conspiracy theorists all wrapped around one story. And that's also what I thought, made the story worth telling in the form of a book, asking people to pay for it, et cetera, because I think it really captures this big, broader world.
Now, the Rich family ended up suing Fox News. Is it, and they settled, right? Did they settle with them?
They settled with Fox, yep.
Was it a nuisance settlement, or was it of substantial value? And were they able to sue a Roger Stone? Were they able to, because defamation's kind of in vogue right now. I mean, we saw it with Rittenhouse is threatening to sue Nicholas Sandmann. Well, Johnny Depp is kind of the big one. Were they able to sue for defamation, a broad scope of people?
So the litigation for the Rich parents, Joel and Mary, Seth's parents, was a really interesting story. They could not sue for defamation because no one had talked about them specifically. No one had said Joel and Mary Rich are in on it. They helped Seth leak the emails, or they covered it up, or they got paid for this, again, hack whistleblowing act that never happened, attributed to Seth Rich. So Joel and Mary couldn't sue for defamation, and they couldn't sue for defamation on behalf of Seth, because when someone dies, they lose their ability when they're dead to sue for defamation, or for anyone else to sue.
You can't libel the dead, and they have no privacy rights. So pick a dead guy and say whatever the hell you want.
And what about Aaron Rich? What about the brother who you said was attacked?
Yeah, so Aaron's case was much more straightforward. That was a defamation case with a few other counts as well in there. But his was very specifically, you said all of these things about me. You said that they were true and stated them as facts. And when I told you they were wrong, you kept on saying them. Straightforward, at least somewhat more of a straightforward argument there. Joel and Mary Rich sued Fox News and two people affiliated with Fox for what's called intentional infliction of emotional distress. They argued that what Fox had done in these two Fox affiliates, Fox affiliated people, a reporter for Fox and a Fox talking head, to be specific, that they had acted so outrageously and in such an extreme way when they tried to sell to the world this story that Seth Rich was this leaker, that amounted to this legal standard, intentional infliction of emotional distress in New York State specifically, and that they could be sued for that, and that Joel and Mary Rich were owed damages for that. And what happened with that suit was they sued Fox for this. The judge at the district level in New York said, this kind of feels like a defamation case in disguise to me. I'm not buying it, and so I'm dismissing it. They appealed it to the Second Circuit, and the Second Circuit said, actually, we think that this case does have merits and should be allowed to proceed. And so they kicked it back to the district level. The Rich family then filed a motion that said, okay, well, here's all the people we want to depose. Sean Hannity, Lou Dobbs, the head of news at Fox, Jay Wallace, the future CEO and then higher up executive, Suzanne Scott. And at that point, Fox said, this is not going to continue any longer. And that is what preceded the settlement negotiations, and they settled late 2020.
Do we know whether that made the Rich family a rich family?
We know that the settlement was in the 7 figures.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just nuisance.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Andy, before we let you go, my understanding is the Steele dossier started out with Republicans who abandoned it, and then the Democrats picked it up. You mentioned earlier that this may have started with some very liberal Democrats, and then it ended up with the Republicans. It does seem, and maybe it's just because Fox News is such a bullhorn, and OAN and all these other sort of rumpy, Trumpy news stations, that it's people on the right who are really generating and consuming most of these conspiracy theories. Have you looked at, and can you tell us what you think is one of the most virulent lefty conspiracy theories that is out there that people seem to be putting some stock in, or at least that people are pushing really hard, hoping we buy into?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the most salacious stuff that ended up in the Steele dossier, the P tape, golden shower, whatever it was, I think a lot of people really wanted that to be true on the left, and there's never been any evidence to come out to suggest that there's any truth to it at all. And again, it's one of those things where, like, measured against publicly known facts, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, Donald Trump is a huge germaphobe who, you know, it doesn't seem like he would be. I mean, I guess he did have his affair with Stormy Daniels, but
he does piss off a lot of low-level workers. Just maybe not on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that really, I think to this day still has a lot of currency on the left that bothers me is this notion that Trump is a Russian asset, that he is somehow controlled or compromised by Russia. And the reason it ticks me off is because there's lots of actual hard evidence out there about, you know, his fondness for Vladimir Putin, or, you know, the meeting his son had with those Russian lawyers during the campaign, the foreign policy of the Trump administration period, that is damning enough and should be as far as you could go on this kind of story. But, you know, there's people on the left who just can't resist going further and, you know, writing his name in Cyrillic and saying that he is someday going to come out as an agent who had been recruited in the 80s by the, you know, by the leaders of the Soviet Union. Like, there's no evidence for any of that. It's on its face absurd on so many levels. And also there's so much more damning stuff of a similar genre that you can point to with actual certitude. You don't have to go full John Le Carre, but I guess, you know, it goes back to that point that people on the left and the right, they can't resist just taking this thing as far as it goes if it feels good to them, right?
Well, and it is funny with Trump, too. Two of the probably the most heinous things that he has done, he told people he was going to do. He said, if I lose the election, I'm going to question the results, and he certainly has done that. And he did say, boy, it'd be great if the Russians could go get some emails and some data, and if foreign governments give me information that I can use to further my political ambitions, I'm going to take it, I'm going to use it. So the two things that really have led to his impeachment and could be a real problem, the first witness in that case to testify is Trump himself.
Right. I mean, it's a very good reminder of the Russia, if you're listening moment, which you don't need to take it any further than that. You don't have to talk about he's an asset, he compromised the P-tape, whatever. He literally stood up at a rally and said it. He asked a foreign rival to either disseminate or hack into and then disseminate Hillary Clinton's emails. And guess what? They actually were doing it right at that exact same time.
Yeah.
So
and probably didn't need to be invited to do so. But
it didn't need to be invited. Yeah. So, yes, everything with Trump was always out in public. It was always what he said. That was the thing. And you don't have to push it into these, you know, Russian asset, double agent conspiracy theories. But, you know, I don't rule the world, and people on the left will take it as far as sometimes as people on the right will.
Yeah, how do you have a conspiracy theory when everything's out in the open? They put it out there. And then in the end, Seth Rich, you know, that they're pinning the leak on him. Mueller, didn't he indict, I think, 12 Russians for the leak?
Yeah.
So
he did.
You said 2016 was kind of the height of these conspiracy theories, which I find that hard to believe that it was worse than 2020. But have we seen a calming down of, say, QAnon sites and 4chan, and I know there's Kiwi Farm now. There's almost too many to keep track of. Is that cooling off a bit, or is it still? Are we going to go through this again in 2024?
Oh, we'll go through it again in 2024. It won't look the same as it did in 2020 or 2016. I'd be lying if I could tell you what it would look like. Otherwise, you know, I would be clairvoyant. But I think that 2016 was the high water mark because at the same time you had the Alex Joneses of the world, the Roger Stones and their ilk using Facebook and Twitter and YouTube the platforms were so agnostic about doing anything to moderate what's on their tools. You know,
Well, and then,
Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not an arbiter of truth. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and then when they do, they kind of feed the conspiracy theories more by some of the decisions they make. But
right, what I'm really curious about with 2024, though it's also this applies to 2022, is you see a lot of the people who pushed QAnon or COVID conspiracy theories, the big lie, as some have called it in 2020. You know, they've kind of gotten more siloed into other platforms like Gab and Truth Social and Getter, and like I don't spend as much time on those, a little bit of time, but not as much as I do on the mainstream ones. And so how are these things going to play out when people are not only sort of filter bubbled within one thing like Facebook, but now that's actually fragmented across different social media platforms? I don't know whether that makes it better or worse. I'm still trying to get a handle on it, to be honest.
Well, it does seem like 2016 was very fertile ground because social media was the wild, wild west. There's no sheriff, there's no nothing. And now that people are feeling a little bit like they're being outed and they're being blocked, that maybe they are starting to break into these little factions. It's almost like the virus mutates enough till it's either not harmless or it's only harmless to certain groups. So, yeah, I guess if they're all kind of huddled up together in their creepy little corners,
but
maybe that's not a bad thing.
ML, if there's no one to fight with, though, does the conspiracy theory grow, right? If there's no one pushing back on it, does it just die in this void of people yelling, you know, in a cloud, yelling at a cloud?
Well, Andy seems like a reasonable guy, and he's got a buddy who thinks the moon landing was fake. So I think there's.
Hey, my grandma thought it was fake.
You put some and OJ was a part of it. You put some beer into it. They in fact, I think they shot him, didn't they? Capricorn
OJ?
1. Remember Capricorn 1 with OJ? They got him. He was climbing a mountain or something.
Everyone knows that reference.
He's going for a rental car.
Deep cut.
Yeah,
very deep.
They got him. But yeah, so we'll see. Andy, we really appreciate your time. I know you got some good stuff coming up in ProPublica. Do they give you a leave for the book, or do you just do that on the side, or does that an outgrowth of some of the work you've been doing for ProPublica?
You know, I did it almost entirely on the side. I covered the case a bit when I was at Rolling Stone, where I was before ProPublica, when I was cool, my brief moment of coolness. But no leave. This was a lot of late nights and weekends, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone else, to be honest, looking back.
Yeah, no, it's some heavy lifting. It's great work. You can find what Andy does during the day at ProPublica.com. At night, you can go to AndyKroll.com. I think there's some pretty spicy videos there, but they may be deep fakes. We're not really sure. But his book is A Death on W Street, The Murder of Seth Rich and the Age of Conspiracy. Check it out at bookstores everywhere. It's not in a brown paper cover. And any predictions on the big Michigan State game coming up?
Oh, come on, jeez.
He's an unabashed Wolverine.
I think this is a 35-10 Michigan victory. I'm feeling pretty good this year against little brother.
There we go.
More fake news from Andy Kroll. He left out the whole Chelsea Clinton was hanging out in Bloomingdale's or wherever it was when this happened. So, but we'll save that for the next show. Andy, thanks very much. Good luck with the book. And any chance we're going to see this on TV or at the movie theater someday?
Yeah, well, the book has been optioned by Sony's TV arm, and they're working on it and should be trying to pitch it fairly soon. So yes, ideally on your television screen before 2024.
Are you going to be a character in it?
No, I'm not going to be a character in it, but I am told that when the TV guys interviewed Jack Berkman, that Jack Berkman asked to play himself on the show.
Of course.
He's always on target, man. He's a good promoter.
Can't you do like a cameo of like one of the soccer guys who are like, oh, I tripped again or something, where you fall in the mud, and just sort of a lighthearted moment where you can.
I mean, that's what I do already. That would just be a very cinema verite approach, but maybe that's my best opening here.
That would be one of those Easter eggs that I'd pay the price of admission to see that. So, well, I'll tell you what, if it does end up going into production, we'd love to have you come back and talk about it. Last week we had Sherry Fink on talking about 5 days at Memorial and that process of going from book to film is fascinating, as is the subject matter. So, Andy, thanks for the time, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
I'd love it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks,
so you
Andy.
can eat your words on that football prediction, and then we'll talk about that damn TV show.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
All right, bye-bye.
Oh man, the geeks have inherited the earth.
Did I do that?
What a dork.
Does him wanting to play with us again mean that he's turning into a geek, or we're turning into cool guys?
Insufferably proud is true. Before we talk about this week's geek, let's talk about some guys who are going to help you out with your own finances.
I forgot about them.
And trying to, stay on track. I think actually the market looks okay today.
It was up a little bit last time I saw.
I know I shouldn't be looking at it. This is what Luke does.
Get in the game, man. Give Luke Nowacki a call, 248-663-4748. He's going to give you a complimentary consultation. He is with Pinnacle Wealth Strategies. He's going to get you a plan, whether it's bonds or equities, and what do you do with your money, 401ks, 529s, all that stuff. It's important to know how every decision you make financially affects every future decision you're going to make financially. So give Luke a call once again, 248-663-4748.
Because when you call Luke, he'll make it all about you, sweetheart.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through Royal Alliance Associates Inc. Member FINRA SIPC. Royal Alliance Associates Inc. is separately owned, and other entities and or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Royal Alliance Associates Inc.
I don't feel like I really sold that. He will make it all about you, sweetheart.
Securities and investment...
Oh, wait. Yeah.
It's just the cue. The other guy is David Hall in Hall Financial.
Pavlov over here.
Well, who's that? If you have over $5,000 in credit card debt and you own a home, you got to call Hall Financial to see how they can help you. They're going to give you a free 5-minute mortgage review. That's all it's going to take to see how much money you've gained in home equity. And then you can kind of roll it all together and consolidate those loans into one. Hall Financial has 5,000 five-star reviews. They're Michigan's highest-rated mortgage company. Check and see if a cash-out refinance makes sense for you right now at 866-CALL-HALL, or you can just go to our website and click on the link.
And if you go to our website, you'll find links to all of our sponsors. And when you contact our sponsors, please let them know that you found about them from the show. That's mlsolvedetroit.com. And now it's time for our Geek of the Week. A guy, as I mentioned to Andy, who knows about conspiracies and how they do and don't happen. For anybody who thinks the federal government is capable of pulling off a conspiracy, let me tell you about Fat Leonard. Fat Leonard is the kind of guy that you can't miss. For starters, he's a big guy. He's also a very high-profile criminal who admitted bribing dozens of Navy officers as part of a $35 million fraud scheme. Nevertheless, he was granted house arrest because he was in prison for a little while, but then he said, I'm sick, I got to get out. And they said, okay, you're sick, we'll let you out. We're going to guard you. But then they're like, well, it's taking a long time to guard him, so we don't want to spend all that money giving 24/7 security. So they allowed Fat Leonard to hire his own security force. So, okay, so that's mistake number 2. So then he is allowed to live in a place at his own expense. So he picks a $7,000 a month home in a gated community where he's living with his family and his dog, which sounds like, cruel and unusual punishment to me. So that's the third mistake, letting a shitbag live in the lap of luxury. Fourth mistake, it's getting close to sentencing after all these years of Fat Leonard testifying against people he bribed, saying he's sick, getting out of prison, living a pretty good life, hiring his own security. Well, we're getting pretty close to the finish line where Leonard really doesn't have much reason to be a good boy anymore because the sentencing is going to be pretty harsh. Nobody checks on him regularly. So Fat Leonard, who's really sick and gonna die any minute, lambs. He takes off, and he's bouncing all over the world for 16 days before he is finally reapprehended. So for trusting someone they never should have trusted, federal authorities who let a 6'2", 350-pound crook slip through their fingers, you're our Geek of the Week.
Oops. I've never heard of this guy before, man.
Really, he bribed Navy officers.
$35 million. And is he? You said he's back in the country now to be sentenced?
They got him.
All right, good.
We caught him.
All right.
But the thing about him is, what he would do is he would wine and dine all these federal officials, all these Navy officers, and then they'd say things like, we're giving you $8 million so you can bring, I don't know, 3 tons of naval jelly or whatever the hell it was he sold to supply the ships. And he would never deliver it, but he would bill it and he would get paid. And everybody who was part of these deals lived a really good life because Fat Leonard really knew how to party and show people a good time.
God.
But it was all just a hustle. It was all just scamming the government, and the government is us, the taxpayers. And he lived very, very well even after he admitted doing it, and the feds let him. And now
he's our geek of the week.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess it was all worth it, right, feds? Whatever you saved.
There's an all-night party in room 7609. And you can dance together all night if you've got the time.
So Sean was going to come up with the Room 7609 selection this week, but failed to do so and left in shame.
Well, I actually did leave for an emergency, so it wasn't like he got bored and just disappeared or fell asleep. He actually had a little emergency. He said everything's okay, but he had to go. He had a bolt. I feel bad for him. He drove all the way out here, was here for 5 minutes, and had to turn around and go home.
I actually think he made some considerable contributions in his time here. And pound for pound, it was one of the best Sean shows we've had in a long time. So, well, God, I hope something bad didn't happen. I'm going to feel like an asshole later.
No, you'll be fine.
Okay, well, that lazy bum Sean left us here with nothing to do. But guess what? Room 7609 is always open. And in honor of Andy Kroll and his exposing a conspiracy, we've invited the Thompson twins to perform Lies.